Julie. Thanks for your email. I got it while I'm sitting in an airport, so I'm going to try to create a movie explaining to you why I think STEM instruction is the most important move in current education. But let me begin, first of all, with a question, not only for you, but for all the teachers that you're presenting to. What happened in kindergarten through 12th grade education recently for the very first time in human history, and it will likely never happen again? You may want to pause the video to think about this for a minute. But something happened last year that had never happened before and will probably never happen again. And when I realized it, it had a tremendous impact on how I view education. For the first time in human history, when we go back to our classrooms, whether we teach kindergarten, 12th grade, or anything in between, every single student will have been born in a different millennium than their instructor. That means that the education that we got probably is not going to work for them. We can't use yesterday's educational model and yesterday's educational content to train today's students for tomorrow's jobs. A colleague of mine said it very well. Are we preparing them for their future or for our past? When I was in school, the American career landscape looked like this. Most people were employed in middle-class sectors. There are a few people in the lower-paying jobs, but quite often those were young entry-level workers who would eventually work into middle-level employment. And a few of us went on to college, got white-collar jobs. And the middle-class sector back then was governed in America by manufacturing. There might be a steel mill in town, a lumber mill, an electronics manufacturing, or an automobile manufacturing plant. But manufacturing carried the economy. And even for those of us that were not in the manufacturing sector, perhaps we were teachers or grocers or something like that, our community was empowered and supported by the economy of manufacturing. But today's economy has changed. Much of the manufacturing sector has moved overseas to lower cost labor markets. That means our middle class sector has shrunken or even disappeared. Many of the manufacturing businesses, the mills, the plants, the factories have closed down. That means that more and more people are in low-paying jobs now and cannot move up. Those that do go to college, and there are many more that do, often are graduating with massive debt and not finding employment. That's the bad news. But the good news is that STEM careers have filled that middle-class sector. However, our educational system is still based on a manufacturing model. The jobs of tomorrow probably don't even exist today in some ways. My students who were 8th graders 4 years ago just graduated from high school. When I had them as 8th graders, there was no such thing 4 years ago as an autonomous car, and now it's something that we hear about all the time. I don't know what my students now will have for career options in 4 years. So I can't just teach them content. It used to be that when you went to school, the more content you mastered, the more marketable you were. But now, if a student gets out of 8th grade and they've mastered all the content standards, in 4 years, they're obsolete. We have to train our students much differently these days. Most of tomorrow's careers are in STEM-related fields. The top 10 highest-paying careers are all STEM careers. This means that math procedures will be less marketable in the future. Memorization of procedures will not be as important a job skill as it was when I was in school. It still has value. Being able to think mathematically and think scientifically will be much more important than memorizing the content that I had to learn. And lastly, I want to mention this. We're competing against video games. Whether we like it or not, students are engaged in video games and they're not engaged in our classrooms. We need to learn from how video game programmers engage students and design our classrooms the same way. For example, we often hear students say, "Oh, I'm not good at math," or "I'm not good at science. I tried it once." But we never hear them say, "I'm not good at video games. I tried them once." Students will try and try and try in a video game knowing that they're going to fail the level repeatedly, and yet that failure does not intimidate them in any way. They're not impeded, they're not risk averse as they are in our classrooms. So there's something about the way video games are designed But think about it, video games start out simple. When you start level 1, you know what to do. You know how to run the controller. What you don't know is that there's a zombie hiding behind that tree. And he comes out and he eats you when you die. But the student doesn't say, oh darn, I failed, I'm not good at video games. They just try again. And they go back and now they've developed a new synapse in their brain called, there's a zombie behind the tree. But they didn't know about the trap door. And that gets them the second time. But they keep restarting level 1 until they've mastered it. Then they get to level 2, and it's a little bit different, but most of it's the same. There's just a few new things to learn, a few new synapses to build. And they like to be instructed that way, incrementally. I had the pleasure of having my granddaughter attend the school where I taught 8th grade. And when she was in kindergarten, I asked her one time, what's your favorite subject in school, sweetie? She looked at me with kind of a funny face like she didn't understand that question. And she said, I guess whales. And I thought, she looks at education so much differently compared to me. I have broken it apart into here's math, here's science, here's language arts, here's social studies, this is PE. But she does whales. She does whale math, whale reading, whale writing, whale science, whale art. Because no brain has ever said, boy, I want to learn math standard 4.2 or science standard 3.1. No, they say, I want to learn about whales. And they will master and learn the math and science content necessary for that. So that's why I see STEM as being very important. It's the natural way the brain wants to learn. It wants to learn about robotics. It wants to learn about the environment. And whatever math and science is necessary for that is simply part of the journey. I want you to think for a minute about your own children when they learn to walk. They're probably about a year old. Mine were. And you know what? When my sons first learned to walk, they were terrible at it. They fell repeatedly. They stumbled. They looked drunk. And yet they never got discouraged. They laughed. They smiled from ear to ear. And every time they stumbled, they couldn't wait to get back up and try again. STEM instruction is kind of like that. When students take a math test or a science test with typical traditional instruction, that's the end of the journey. You're going to start the next unit after that one's over, pass or fail. And yet with STEM instruction, you try to build something, you try to engineer something. And then, once that's done, if it doesn't work, you evaluate it and you revise it and you try again. To me, STEM is the natural way the brain learns. So thanks again for asking me to do this. I hope you guys have a great school year.